They fired me during the pitch worth $120 million. Right there, in front of 12 investors, while I stood frozen at the podium. One click on slide 42 made the entire boardroom fall silent. Too late to salvage anything I didn't need to scream. They destroyed themselves. The laptop screen glowed with their death sentence, a document they'd never bothered to read. 11 years of building their empire, and they thought I'd simply walk away empty-handed. They were wrong. My name is Valerie Quinn, and I built HaleviMed from nothing. Not the glossy story they tell investors about visionary leadership and market disruption. I mean the actual building every algorithm, every line of code that made our AI diagnostics platform worth 9 figures for 11 years. I arrived at 6:30 a.m. and left when the cleaning crew started their rounds at midnight. I was employee number 3, co-founder and everything but the paperwork. The termination meeting happened in Conference Room A, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. Rain streaked the glass, typical for March, creating rivulets that distorted the city lights below. I sat across from Wyatt Greer, our new CEO, imported 6 months ago from Goldman Sachs to prepare us for the next level. His Armani suit cost more than most engineers' monthly salary. Behind him, our CFO Marcus Chen shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. The head of HR, a woman whose name I never bothered learning, typed furiously on her laptop. "Valerie," Wyatt began, his voice carrying that particular Wall Street cadence, confident, dismissive, already moving past you to the next meeting. "We appreciate everything you've done for HaleviMed, but the company is evolving. We need leadership that aligns with our new strategic vision." Strategic vision? I almost laughed. His strategic vision involved replacing our core development team with offshore contractors and pivoting to AI-enhanced wellness solutions, basically. Glorified mood rings with machine learning. "You're terminating me 3 hours before the investor presentation." I kept my voice steady, clinical, facts, not emotions. That's what they taught us in engineering school. "The timing is unfortunate," Marcus finally looked up. "But the board made their decision. We'll honor your vesting schedule, of course, 2 weeks severance for each year of service." 22 weeks. They calculated my 11 years down to a severance package that wouldn't cover my mortgage through summer. And my projects, the diagnostic algorithm for early-stage pancreatic cancer detection, were 3 months from FDA approval. Wyatt's smile was practiced, empty. "The team will handle the transition. We've already assigned Brad Morrison as acting CTO." Brad Morrison, the yes man who couldn't debug a Hello World program without Stack Overflow. The same Brad who asked me, just last week, to explain how our neural networks actually worked, because he needed to speak intelligently to investors. I stood up slowly, gathering my laptop bag, the moleskin notebook where I'd sketched our first system architecture, my father's fountain pen, the one he'd given me when I graduated from MIT. Small things that held 11 years of late nights and breakthrough moments. "We'll need your laptop and company phone," the HR woman said, extending her hand. "Of course." I pulled out the MacBook Pro, the one with the encrypted partition they didn't know about, and placed it on the conference table. The phone followed. "Building access. Security will escort you out. You can arrange to collect personal items later this week." Through the glass walls, I could see the development floor. My former team hunched over their screens, probably debugging the demo for this afternoon's presentation. They had no idea their lead architect was being shown the door. In 3 hours, Wyatt would stand in front of Atlas Capital and pitch my work as his vision. "One question," I said, pausing at the door. "Who's running the technical deep dive in the pitch?" The investors specifically requested architecture details. Wyatt's composure cracked, just slightly. "Brad will handle it. Brad doesn't know about the patent structuring, or the licensing dependencies, or why we built redundancy into the—" "Thank you, Valerie." His dismissal was sharp, final. "HR will be in touch about the exit paperwork." Security was waiting outside Tom, who I'd shared coffee with every morning for 5 years. His face was apologetic as he walked me to the elevator. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? another casualty of corporate evolution. As the elevator descended, I thought about the code repository, about the commit history with my name on 90% of the critical components, about the provisional patents I'd filed through my father's old law firm, keeping them separate until the company was ready, about the architecture documents I'd never quite gotten around to transferring from my personal server. They thought they were firing a difficult engineer. They had no idea they were severing themselves from their own foundation. The rain was heavier when I reached the street. I didn't have an umbrella, it was in my desk drawer, along with 11 years of accumulated moments. But I didn't run for cover. Instead, I stood there, letting the Seattle rain soak through my blazer, and smiled. In 3 hours, Wyatt Greer would click through his presentation, confident in his strategic vision. He wouldn't know about Slide 42 yet. He would soon. The coffee shop on Pine Street was nearly empty at 2:30 p.m. I ordered a double espresso and found a corner table, my clothes still damp from the rain. As the laptop powered on my personal one, not the company machine they'd confiscated, memories flooded back like debugged code finally running clean. 11 years ago, I'd sat in this same coffee shop with David Park and Rachel Morrison, sketching our first system architecture on napkins. We were going to revolutionize medical diagnostics using AI pattern recognition. David had the medical background, Rachel brought the business connections, and I had the technical vision. We worked 18-hour days in David's garage, surviving on ramen and the absolute certainty that we were building something important. The diagnostic algorithm started as my graduate thesis project, a machine learning model that could identify early-stage cellular mutations in pancreatic tissue samples. Traditional detection methods caught the disease too late. My algorithm could spot patterns human eyes missed, potentially adding years to patients' lives. When David saw my research, he convinced me to leave my cushy job at Microsoft and turn it into something real. But building the technology was only half the battle. We needed data. FDA clearance, hospital partnerships, most critically, we needed money. That's when things got complicated. My father, James Quinn, had been a patent attorney specializing in biotech before lung cancer took him 5 years ago, in his final months, when he could barely speak above a whisper. He'd given me advice that seemed paranoid at the time. Never put all your eggs in the company basket. Val, keep something in reserve. The people who smile at board meetings will gut you the moment it's profitable. So I listened. Every major breakthrough, every critical innovation, I documented through Quinn Holdings LLC, a shell company my father had helped me establish. Officially. I was consulting for my own startup. The provisional patents were filed under Quinn Holdings, with licensing agreements that seemed like standard boilerplate to anyone who didn't read the fine print. HaleviMed had exclusive use, yes, but ownership. That was a different story. The code architecture told the same tale. My digital signature was embedded in every critical function, not through vanity, but through necessity. I'd built our encryption protocols, our data pipeline, our neural network framework. The commit history showed thousands of contributions under my username, vquinn Prime. Brad Morrison couldn't even access the core repositories without my authentication tokens. I pulled up the system dashboard on my laptop, entering through a backdoor I'd maintained for emergency debugging. Everything was still running smoothly. The team was probably making final adjustments for the presentation, unaware that their technical foundation rested on legal quicksand. 3 years ago, when the first acquisition offers started rolling in, I'd sensed the shift. Board meetings became closed-door sessions. My technical reports were suddenly too detailed for investor updates. They brought in consultants to optimize our structure, which translated to pushing original employees toward the margins. David had already been forced out, his equity diluted through successive funding rounds. Rachel lasted another year before taking a buyout. But I stayed, partly from stubbornness, partly because I couldn't abandon what I'd built. Every morning, I'd walk past the wall of patents in our lobby, my algorithms framed like trophies, with the company's name prominently displayed and mine relegated to small print. They assumed my silence meant compliance. They assumed wrong. My phone personal, not company, buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim, one of my senior engineers. Val, what's happening? Security just locked your accounts. Brad's freaking out about the demo. I typed back, check your personal email in 3 hours. The beauty of my position was its subtlety. I hadn't sabotaged anything or stolen proprietary data. I'd simply maintained ownership of what I'd created, using the same legal frameworks corporations wielded against employees every day. The provisional patents would expire in 6 months unless properly filed. The licensing agreements contained termination clauses triggered by material breach of founding principles. The code repositories required my biometric authentication for core access, a security feature I'd insisted on after a ransomware scare 2 years ago. They could run the demo this afternoon. The algorithms would process data. The visualizations would impress investors. And Wyatt would take credit for innovations he couldn't explain if his life depended on it. But when Atlas Capital's due diligence team started examining the IP portfolio, when their lawyers read past the executive summary, when they realized HaleviMed was licensing its core technology from an LLC owned by the engineer they'd just terminated. I smiled, closing the laptop. The espresso had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Bitter medicine for a bitter moment. In my bag, a flash drive labeled Slide 42 waited like a patient predator. 3 hours until the presentation. Just enough time to ensure the right people received the right information at the right moment. They thought they were firing a problematic employee. They were actually triggering their own controlled demolition. The only question now was how far the debris would scatter. The law offices of Brennan and Associates occupied a modest suite in Pioneer Square, far from the glass towers where corporate firms billed $1,000 hours. I chose them precisely because they weren't on HaleviMed's radar. Margaret Brennan had been my father's colleague, one of the few patent attorneys who understood both technology and strategy. "Everything's in order," Margaret said, sliding documents across her desk. "Quinn Holdings owns the provisional patents for 17 core algorithms, including the pancreatic cancer detection system. HaleviMed has been operating under a licensing agreement that," she smiled, "contains some interesting termination clauses." I opened my laptop and inserted the flash drive. The file was elegantly simple, a presentation deck that mirrored HaleviMed's official pitch, slide for slide, until you reached number 42. Most investors would be viewing it on tablets during the meeting, scrolling ahead while Wyatt droned on about market penetration and scalability. Slide 42 contained 3 elements: a legal analysis from Brennan and Associates, confirming Quinn Holdings' ownership of all critical IP, a termination notice for the licensing agreement effective in 72 hours, and a single question in 48-point font: how much is HaleviMed worth without its technology? "You're sure about the timing?" Margaret asked. Atlas Capital's due diligence team includes Jennifer Wexler. She always reads ahead and always checks footnotes. When she hits slide 42 at approximately 4:45 p.m., she'll flag it to the senior partners immediately. I pulled up Atlas Capital's investor portal, amazing what you could access with credentials nobody remembered to revoke, and uploaded the modified deck to their secure document room. It would appear as a supplementary technical appendix submitted by V. Quinn, chief architect, not false, since they hadn't technically stripped my title yet. Margaret leaned back, studying me. "You know they'll sue." With what grounds I followed every contractual obligation. The provisional patents were filed before my employment agreement. The licensing terms are clear. They had 11 years to secure full ownership and chose not to prioritize it. "And your plan afterward?" I showed her the second flash drive. "I've had 3 years to prepare. Alternative architectures, improved algorithms, strategic partnerships with researchers who actually understand the technology. HaleviMed owns a version of my work. I own the evolution." My phone buzzed Sarah again. "Val, the demo crashed. Brad can't access the neural network configs. Wyatt's losing it." Of course, Brad had probably tried to modify parameters without understanding the authentication cascade. I could fix it with 3 terminal commands, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I typed back, "Check your personal email, now." The email I'd queued contained everything my core team needed to know: the real ownership structure, the termination timeline, and an invitation. Not to sabotage or steal, I wasn't interested in petty revenge, but to consider their options when HaleviMed's valuation inevitably cratered. Margaret walked me through the remaining documents. The licensing termination gives them 72 hours to negotiate new terms, given their investor presentation is happening. She checked her watch. In 45 minutes. That should create interesting dynamics. They won't negotiate. Wyatt's too proud, and the board won't understand the technical implications until it's too late. I signed the last form, making everything official. By Monday, they'll be scrambling to reverse engineer code they can no longer legally use. And if they claim you developed everything as work product, then they'll have to explain why the commit history shows core development happening on personal equipment, outside business hours, before my employment began, why the provisional patents predate my hiring, why their own documentation lists me as an external consultant for the first 6 months. I smiled. I learned from my father: document everything, assume nothing, protect what matters. The presentation folder on Atlas's portal showed a view notification: J. Wexler, 4:37 p.m., 8 minutes early, even better. I closed the laptop and stood. Invoice Quinn Holdings for your time. We'll need ongoing representation. Margaret shook my hand. Your father would be proud, paranoid, but proud. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pioneer Square bustled with the usual mix of tourists and tech workers, everyone absorbed in their own dramas. My phone showed 17 missed calls from HaleviMed's main line. They'd figured out the demo issue, probably kludged together a workaround. Wyatt was probably standing at the podium right now, selling my life's work to people who thought innovation meant a better PowerPoint template. In approximately 8 minutes, Jennifer Wexler would reach slide 42. She'd pause, read it twice, then quietly message her senior partner. The partner would discreetly pull up the legal analysis on his phone. Whispered conversations would ripple through Atlas's side of the table. Wyatt wouldn't notice at first, too absorbed in his own performance. But eventually, someone would ask about the IP structure, about Quinn Holdings, about the engineer they'd fired 3 hours before their biggest pitch. And then the real presentation would begin. By 6 p.m., the Seattle Tech forums were buzzing. Someone had leaked that Atlas Capital walked out of HaleviMed's presentation halfway through. The details were sparse, but phrases like IP concerns and due diligence red flags spread like malware through social networks. I sat in my Queen Anne apartment, laptop open to multiple dashboards. The HaleviMed Slack, they'd forgotten to revoke my access, showed pure chaos. Brad Morrison had posted 17 increasingly frantic messages in the engineering channel. The latest: urgent need all hands to document code ownership. Legal needs a full audit by tomorrow morning. My phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the area code: Atlas Capital's headquarters. Ms. Quinn, this is Jennifer Wexler from Atlas. I believe you're familiar with our firm. Hello, Jennifer. I kept my voice neutral, professional. How can I help you? I'll be direct. We discovered some concerning documentation during today's presentation, specifically regarding intellectual property ownership. Are you available to discuss this matter? I'm happy to meet. However, I should mention that any discussions about HaleviMed's technology will need to go through my legal representation at Brennan & Associates. A pause. I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Actually, Ms. Quinn, we're interested in discussing Quinn Holdings. Would tomorrow morning work, say, 8 a.m.? I'll check with my attorney and confirm within the hour. After we hung up, I pulled up my monitoring scripts. HaleviMed's servers were spinning up emergency instances, probably trying to migrate critical systems. The authentication logs showed dozens of failed attempts to access core repositories. Without my biometric keys, they were locked out of their own architecture. An encrypted message appeared in my personal inbox. Sarah Kim. Val, it's chaos here. Wyatt called an all-hands at 5:30. Told everyone you'd been let go for performance issues and that Brad would lead the technical team. Then Atlas Partners started walking out during his funding slide. Now legal's here, going through everyone's computers. What's happening? I composed my reply carefully. The company is discovering that employment contracts and IP ownership are different things. If you still have access to your personal projects and side work, I'd suggest backing them up tonight. The subtext was clear. Several of my team members had contributed to the core platform on their own time, using their own equipment, just as I had. If HaleviMed was about to face an IP audit, those contributions would matter. My building's doorman called up. "Ms. Quinn, there's a Marcus Webb here to see you. Says it's urgent." Marcus Webb, HaleviMed's general counsel. I'd wondered when they'd send the lawyers. "Tell him I'm not available. He can contact Brennan and Associates." 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Valerie, this is Marcus. We need to talk before this goes any further. The board is willing to discuss reinstatement and a significant equity adjustment. Please." I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Margaret Brennan. Evidence of their desperation would be useful later. The HaleviMed Slack continued its descent into chaos. Someone in finance posted that Atlas had formally withdrawn from negotiations. The sales team reported that 2 other potential investors had postponed their meetings. Then, at 6:47 p.m., someone dropped a bomb in the general channel. "Has anyone actually seen our patent filings? Legal can't find the original documentation for the core algorithms." I smiled. They were just beginning to understand the scope of their problem. The provisional patents under Quinn Holdings weren't just a technicality. They were the foundation everything else was built on. Every improvement, every iteration, every deployment traced back to IP they didn't own. My laptop pinged with a calendar invitation from Atlas Capital. Tomorrow, 8 a.m., their executive conference room. The attendee list was interesting: Jennifer Wexler, 2 senior partners, and their head of technical due diligence, no lawyers yet. They wanted to understand what they'd almost bought before deciding on next steps. I accepted the invitation and opened a new document. Time to prepare a different kind of presentation. Not slides about market share and growth projections, but something more fundamental, a technical architecture that could be rebuilt, improved, and owned completely by whoever understood its value. The email counter on my personal account kept climbing. Former colleagues, industry contacts, reporters who'd caught wind of the story. I ignored them all except one, from David Park, my original co-founder. "Heard about today. Remember what we used to say? The code doesn't lie, but executives do. If you're building something new, I'm in." Outside my window, Seattle's skyline glittered with office lights. In one of those towers, HaleviMed's leadership was probably in crisis mode, trying to understand how they'd lost control of their own company. They'd focused so hard on pushing out the difficult engineer that they'd never asked the critical question, what exactly did she engineer? And who really owned it? By morning, they'd have their answer, and I'd have my future. The Atlas Capitol building pierced Seattle's morning fog like a glass needle. At 7:55 a.m., I stepped into their executive conference room, Margaret Brennan at my side. The view stretched from Elliott Bay to Mount Rainier, a panorama of power that probably closed more deals than any PowerPoint. Jennifer Wexler stood as we entered, extending her hand. "Ms. Quinn, thank you for coming." Her 2 colleagues, Michael Torres, senior partner, and Dr. Rashid Patel, head of technical due diligence, remained seated, tablets and notebooks arranged with military precision. "Before we begin," Margaret interjected, "we should clarify that Ms. Quinn is here as CEO of Quinn Holdings, not as a former HaleviMed employee." "Understood." Jennifer gestured to the conference table. "Shall we?" I opened my laptop and connected to their presentation system. No fancy animations, no stock photos of smiling doctors, just clean technical diagrams and code architecture. "What you almost invested in yesterday was a shell," I began. HaleviMed owns deployment infrastructure, sales channels, and a brand. What they don't own is the core technology that makes any of it valuable. Dr. Patel leaned forward. We've reviewed the documentation, the provisional patents, the licensing structure. It's unusually complex for a startup. My father was a patent attorney. He taught me that complexity in the right places prevents simplicity in the wrong ones. I clicked to the next slide, a timeline showing parallel development tracks. Every major algorithm was developed on personal time, using personal resources, then licensed to HaleviMed. The company paid for integration and optimization, not innovation. And now, Torres spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen 100 deals die over fine print. Now Quinn Holdings is terminating that licensing agreement. HaleviMed has 72 hours to negotiate new terms or lose access to the technology. I switched to a code dependency graph. Without the core algorithms, their entire platform becomes unusable. They can't even access the repositories without my biometric authentication. Jennifer exchanged glances with her partners. What are you proposing? This was the moment I'd rehearsed. I'm not interested in destroying HaleviMed. What I'm interested in is building something better. Quinn Holdings has improved versions of every algorithm, developed over the past 3 years, faster processing, better accuracy, lower infrastructure costs. We also have commitments from 5 senior engineers to join once we're funded. The same engineers currently at HaleviMed. Dr. Patel's question carried a hint of legal concern. The same engineers who've been updating their LinkedIn profiles since yesterday evening, Margaret clarified. No solicitation required when employment becomes untenable. I pulled up the performance metrics. The pancreatic cancer detection algorithm, HaleviMed, is pitching 78% accuracy in clinical trials. Our improved version hits 91%. Their processing time is 4 hours per batch. Ours is 40 minutes. Their FDA submission is based on old architecture that will need complete revalidation if modified. Ours is ready for initial filing. Torres was taking notes now. Development timeline. 6 months to market-ready platform. We'll focus initially on pancreatic and liver cancer detection areas where early diagnosis has maximum impact. Direct partnerships with research hospitals, not the enterprise sales model HaleviMed pursued. I clicked to financial projections. Lower customer acquisition costs, faster deployment, better outcomes. And HaleviMed, Jennifer asked. We'll spend the next 6 months in legal disputes, technical debt, and talent exodus. By the time they sort out the IP issues, we'll have launched. I closed the laptop. Or they could license the improved technology from Quinn Holdings at market rates. I'm not vindictive, just practical. Dr. Patel had been scrolling through technical documentation on his tablet. The biometric authentication on the core repositories that seems unusually restrictive. I implemented it after a ransomware attack 2 years ago. The board approved it as a critical security measure. I smiled. They probably regret that enthusiasm now. Silence settled over the room. Outside, morning ferry traffic crossed the bay. These were people who measured opportunity in basis points and market share. They'd come prepared to dissect a failed deal. Instead, they were looking at a new one. Torres spoke first. What do you need? 20 million Series A, 5 million immediate for infrastructure and hiring, 15 million staged over 18 months based on milestones. Quinn Holdings maintains 51% ownership and full board control for the first 2 years. That's aggressive for a first-time founder, Jennifer noted. I'm not a first-time founder. I'm a founder who learned what happens when you give up control too early. I stood, Margaret following my lead. You have my proposal. HaleviMed's licensing termination takes effect in 66 hours. After that, every day they delay is a day we pull further ahead. Dr. Patel raised one final question. The 5 engineers you mentioned, are they bound by non-competes? Washington state law limits non-compete enforcement, especially when the employer terminates without cause or constructively dismisses through hostile reorganization. Margaret's legal precision cut through any ambiguity. We've reviewed each situation. No barriers to immediate employment. I gathered my laptop, pausing at the door. One more thing. If you check HaleviMed's stock performance this morning, you'll notice unusual trading patterns. Word travels fast in Seattle tech circles. We left them with that thought, riding the elevator down in silence. Only when we reached the street did Margaret speak. Think they'll bite. I pulled out my phone, checking the encrypted messages from my soon-to-be team. Sarah had already started sketching improved architectures. 2 others were documenting their personal contributions to HaleviMed's codebase contributions that would soon be leaving with them. They'll bite, I said. The only question is whether HaleviMed figures out their position before it's too late to negotiate. By Friday afternoon, HaleviMed was hemorrhaging talent like a severed artery. The Slack channels I still monitored told the story in real time. Sarah Kim had submitted her resignation at 9 a.m. By noon, 4 more senior engineers followed. The hashtag general channel devolved from crisis management to barely concealed panic. Reminder, all employees are bound by confidentiality agreements and IP assignments. Any removal of company property or code will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Marcus Webb, General Counsel, posted every hour like a desperate prayer. My phone buzzed with a call from Wyatt Greer himself. I let it go to voicemail, then played his message. Valerie, we need to discuss this situation like adults. You're destroying everything we built together. Call me back. Everything we built together. The audacity was almost admirable. The anonymous email system someone had set up, truth@HaleviMed@protonmail.com, was sharing internal documents with surgical precision. Salary spreadsheets showing engineer compensation 30% below market. Emails where Wyatt discussed trimming the fat from technical teams. Brad Morrison's performance reviews. Ghost-written by managers because he couldn't articulate his own contributions. Then, at 2:45 p.m., the killing blow, someone leaked the all-hands meeting recording from Thursday morning, where Wyatt had announced my termination before the investor pitch, calling me a technical contributor who couldn't adapt to our evolving culture. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 hours before they actually fired me. They'd celebrated my departure before even telling me. My laptop chimed with a secure message from Jennifer Wexler. Terms accepted with minor modifications. Legal documents. Monday. Welcome to the Atlas portfolio. $20 million. Not for promises or projections, but for code I'd already written and knowledge they couldn't steal. I forwarded the confirmation to my assembling team. All still technically HaleviMed employees for another few hours. The HaleviMed board called an emergency meeting at 4 p.m. Someone live-streamed it to the engineering channel, probably their last act of defiance. Wyatt stood at the whiteboard, drawing diagrams he didn't understand, trying to explain how they'd rebuild the architecture from scratch. "It's just code," he said. "We have brilliant engineers. We'll rewrite it better." Brad Morrison's voice, shaky. "Wyatt, we can't even access the current system. The biometric locks, then bypass them. That's not how cryptographic authentication works." The stream cut off, but the damage was done. Screenshots circulated within minutes. Tech Twitter picked up the story. CEO thinks he can just rewrite 11 years of specialized AI development became the afternoon's viral moment. By 5 p.m., HaleviMed's stock had dropped 12%. After-hours trading showed no signs of recovery. The financial press smelled blood. HaleviMed faces IP crisis as key engineer departs, ran on 3 major sites. I sat in my apartment, drafting the transition plan for Quinn Holdings, clean ownership, clear vision, no technical debt from years of rushed deployments and venture capital pivots. We'd build it right this time. An encrypted file appeared in my inbox. For your consideration, SM, Sarah Martinez, from HaleviMed's business development team. Inside, the complete investor contact list, meeting notes from every major health system negotiation, and a simple message. They fired you for building the future. Some of us want to help build it properly. I'd expected the engineers to understand. I hadn't expected the business side to revolt too. But Wyatt had made a crucial error. He'd shown everyone how disposable they were. When you fire someone who'd given 11 years to build your company, everyone else starts updating their resumes. The local news picked up the story at 6 p.m. Seattle startup in crisis as technical team exits. They'd tried to get comments from HaleviMed's PR team, but apparently, the head of communications had also resigned that afternoon. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. Valerie. Marcus Webb sounded exhausted. The board has authorized me to discuss terms. 72 hours. Marcus, you have until Monday at 5:30 p.m. to accept the licensing terms Margaret Brennan sent over. I kept my voice steady. Professional. 5 million annual license, usage restrictions, and audit rights. 5 million, Valerie. Be reasonable. That's more than our entire R&D budget. Then I suggest you find a new R&D budget, or explain to your investors why their $120 million company can't function without technology it doesn't own. This is extortion. This is contract law, the same law you cited when you terminated me without cause during a funding round. I pulled up the termination clause they'd had me sign 11 years ago. Section 12.3. All parties acknowledge that intellectual property developed outside the scope of employment remains with the original creator. You wrote that? Marcus, I just followed it. Silence on the line. Then, the board wants to meet, tonight. The board can review the licensing terms. I'm busy building a company that actually owns its technology. I ended the call. By 7 p.m., 12 HaleviMed employees had reached out about opportunities at Quinn Holdings. By 8 p.m., Atlas Capital's press release announced their new investment in revolutionary diagnostic technology. They didn't mention HaleviMed. They didn't need to. The Seattle tech ecosystem understood what had happened. David slaying Goliath with contractual precision instead of stones. The brilliant engineer who'd protected her work while everyone else focused on valuations and exit strategies. But I wasn't thinking about victory. I was thinking about the patients who'd benefit from 91% accuracy instead of 78%, about the researchers who'd have access to open architecture instead of proprietary black boxes, about building something that couldn't be stolen by the next smooth-talking CEO with a Goldman Sachs pedigree. The city lights reflected off my laptop screen as I coded late into the night, not because I had to, but because I finally could. No meetings about synergy. No pivots to chase trending markets, just clean code solving real problems. They'd fired me for being difficult. They were about to discover how difficult things could really get. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel maintained its old-world elegance even at 10 p.m. on a Friday night. I walked through the lobby in the same blazer I'd worn to my termination, now dry, pressed, and paired with jeans that said, "I wasn't here to beg." Marcus Webb waited in the restaurant's private dining room. Flanked by two board members, I recognized Patricia Huang and Robert Kellerman. Valerie. Patricia stood, extending her hand. She'd always been the reasonable one, the only board member who'd actually read my technical reports. Thank you for coming. I sat without shaking hands. You have 14 hours before the licensing termination takes effect. I assume this isn't a social call. Robert, old money. Old thinking launched immediately. What you're doing is corporate sabotage. We'll sue you into oblivion. With what cause of action? I pulled out my phone, showing them the recording. This is Wyatt announcing my termination at 9:15 a.m. on Thursday. This is the timestamp showing you'd already decided before the meeting at noon. This is the Washington state law on constructive dismissal. Should I continue? Marcus slid a folder across the table. New offer, CTO position, 20% equity, full control of technical decisions. I didn't open it. I already have full control of technical decisions at my own company. Your company is 12 hours old, Robert scoffed. You have no infrastructure, no customers, no FDA approvals. I have $20 million in Series A funding, 5 senior engineers starting Monday, and technology that actually works. I leaned back. You have Brad Morrison and a PowerPoint deck. Patricia intervened. Valerie, we made mistakes. Wyatt was overzealous, but destroying HaleviMed helps no one. Not the employees, not the patients who need this technology. I'm not destroying anything. I'm charging market rate for technology I own. If that destroys Halevi Med, what does that say about your business model? My phone buzzed. Sarah Kim. Legal just sent termination agreements to everyone who resigned. They're threatening to sue for breach of confidentiality. I showed them the message. Threatening your remaining engineers probably isn't the retention strategy I'd recommend. Marcus's composure finally cracked. What do you want? I wanted to build technology that saves lives. You wanted to build a unicorn. These goals diverged about 3 years ago. I stood. The licensing terms Margaret sent are non-negotiable. $5 million annually. Usage restrictions, audit rights, accept by Monday or lose access. $5 million will kill our burn rate, Robert protested. Then perhaps you shouldn't have allocated $6 million for executive bonuses while paying engineers below market. I'd seen the compensation files in the leaked documents. Wyatt's bonus alone could have funded my entire team for a year. Patricia followed me toward the door. Valerie, wait. Off the record, is there any path where we work together? I turned. She looked tired, older than her 60 years. She'd been on the board since the beginning, had believed in the mission before it became about multiples and exit strategies. There was, you chose Wyatt's vision over mine. Now you get to live with that choice. I softened slightly. The technology will still save lives, Patricia. Just not under Halevi Med's banner. Outside, Seattle's night air carried the smell of rain and possibility. My phone showed 37 unread messages. Former colleagues, reporters, competitors sensing opportunity. Tomorrow, I'd start building. Tonight, I just walked. At 11:45 p.m., Margaret Brennan texted, "They're stalling, trying to find loopholes. They won't find any." At 11:58 p.m., Marcus Webb called. I let it ring. At midnight exactly, the licensing agreement terminated. Somewhere in Halevi Med's data center, authentication tokens expired, repository access failed. The brilliant technology they'd pitched to investors became as useful as a locked vault without a key. My laptop showed the cascade of system alerts. Brad Morrison was probably having a panic attack. Wyatt was likely calling board members, demanding solutions they couldn't provide. The overnight DevOps team was discovering that 11 years of technical debt came due all at once. I opened a new terminal window and began coding. Not fixes for Halevi Med. That bridge was ashed, but the foundation for something better. Clean architecture, clear ownership, no compromise on quality. They'd fired me for being difficult, for asking hard questions, for refusing to pretend Brad Morrison was competent or that Wyatt's pivots made sense, for building things that worked instead of things that sold. Now they'd learned the difference between difficult and impossible, between having a challenging employee and having no technology at all. The code flowed like it hadn't in years. No interruptions, no politics, no explaining basic concepts to executives who thought AI was a magic word that justified any valuation. Just problems and solutions, algorithms and elegance. By 3 a.m., I'd sketched the new authentication system. By 4 a.m., the improved neural network architecture. By 5 a.m., as Seattle's sky lightened toward dawn, I'd built more in one night than Halevi Med's remaining team would manage in a month. They'd created their own ending the moment they printed that termination letter. Everything else was just code executing as written. Monday morning arrived with unusual clarity for March in Seattle. No rain, just crisp air and pale sunlight that made the city look newer, cleaner. I stood on the balcony of my Queen Anne apartment, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the sound in shades of copper and gold. At 8:30 a.m., my phone displayed the headline, Halevi Med. Trading halted pending major announcement. The financial press had connected the dots over the weekend mass resignations, failed investor meetings, rumors of IP disputes. The stock had dropped 40% in pre-market trading before the exchange pulled the plug. By 9 a.m., the announcement came. Halevi Med restructures operations, seeks strategic alternatives. Corporate speak for complete collapse. Wyatt Greer had been removed as CEO. Effective immediately. The board was exploring all options. including potential acquisition or liquidation. I felt no satisfaction, no vindictive joy, just the quiet certainty of code executing exactly as written. My laptop showed the flood of emails to Quinn Holdings, researchers who wanted to collaborate, hospitals interested in pilot programs, engineers who saw the future we were building and wanted to contribute, even Jennifer Wexler from Atlas, confirming our first board meeting and adding a personal note, "Impressive execution, looking forward to building something real." At noon, Margaret Brennan called. "They want to negotiate. The new interim CEO is willing to accept the licensing terms." The deadline passed. Terms have changed. I pulled up the new document I'd prepared over the weekend. $10 million annually now. They waited. The price went up. They'll never accept that. Then they'll never use the technology, their choice. By 2 p.m., HaleviMed's parking lot was half empty. The eager reporters had moved on to the next crisis. Only the remaining employees' cars dotted the asphalt, people trying to salvage careers from corporate wreckage. I received one final message from Patricia Huang. "You won. I hope it was worth it." I typed back, "I didn't win. I survived. There's a difference." The truth was simpler than any corporate drama. They'd mistaken creation for employment, innovation for subordination. They'd thought firing me was a power move, not understanding that power comes from building things people need, not from titles or office politics. On my desk, a new incorporation document waited for my signature. Quinn Systems, Inc., clean structure, clear mission, no compromises. David Park had already signed as co-founder. Sarah Kim as CTO, 5 more joining by week's end. We'd build the diagnostic platform we'd always envisioned accurate, accessible, life-saving. I signed my name with my father's fountain pen, the one he'd given me at graduation. He'd been right about keeping something in reserve, about protecting what mattered. The paranoia that had seemed excessive then had proven prescient now. My phone buzzed with a final text from Wyatt Greer. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed something beautiful for your ego." I didn't respond. He'd never understand that beauty in technology comes from function, not funding rounds. That ego was thinking you could fire the architect and keep the building standing. At 5:30 p.m., I closed my laptop and looked out at the city. Somewhere in those glass towers, HaleviMed's board was probably meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. Their employees were updating LinkedIn profiles. Their investors were writing down valuations. And in a small office in Pioneer Square, Quinn Systems was beginning its first real day of operations. No drama, no presentations, no slide 42 waiting like a landmine. Just talented people building technology that worked. They'd fired me during a pitch worth 9 figures. They'd discovered too late that I was worth more than their valuation, not because of ego or revenge, but because I'd done what engineers do, solved the problem in front of me. The problem was never the technology, it was them. I raised my coffee cup to the setting sun, to new beginnings built on old foundations, to the quiet satisfaction of code that runs exactly as intended. Tomorrow, we'd start saving lives. Tonight, I'd simply enjoy the silence of a system finally debugged. They'd created their own slide 42 the moment they chose PowerPoints over patents, executives over engineers, appearance over architecture. I didn't need to destroy them. They'd written that code themselves. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate betrayal and calculated revenge. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold in the tech world, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Valerie's position? Your stories and perspectives make this community special.